Everyone, thanks for jumping on the call today. Before we get started, I'd love to hear where everybody's tuning in from. We have a chat box open, so feel free to type in that and also ask any questions throughout the call. I'll be here monitoring them as they come. And yeah, at the end, we'll be able to answer some of them in our Q&A session as well. All right, so welcome everybody to our webinar From Application to Award, Navigating the Grants Ecosystem for Innovation. We're super excited to have you here with us today as we explore how to effectively manage and maximize grant funding to support innovative projects and initiatives. Today, we bring a dynamic team of professionals who each play a key role in the grant application process, from strategy and writing to technical execution and team leadership. My name is Rochelle Sun, and I've been a grant writer here at Leyton for about a year. I graduated from Tufts University with my bachelor's in biomedical engineering, where I've researched primarily drug delivery and tissue engineering. Now I'm specialized in technical writing and find the best grants for you and your company. All right, now for the stars of the show, I'll be introducing Savannah, our assistant team lead and senior technical consultant, as well as Allie, our consulting team lead.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful that you guys are joining. We're excited to talk to you today. So as Michelle said, my name is Savannah Durham. I'm a senior consultant here at Leyton and assistant team lead. I've been here now for about 5 years. Originally, I have a chemical engineering background and have industry experience specifically with vaccine manufacturing. I use that experience, as you might assume, in the grant writing process, grant identification process, as well as a host of other tax incentives that we offer here at Leyton. And aside from that industry, I have been working on and do work on an abundance of various industries, whether that be for grants or tax incentives. So I'm really excited to be presenting this to you all today, and I hope that it will help clarify the mystery that is the grants process in the United States. And with that, I'll pass it over to Allie to introduce herself.
Great. Thanks, Savannah. Echoing what everyone has said, it's so lovely to have you all here. We're excited to share all this information. We hope it's valuable to you. My background is also in chemical engineering, and I've worked closely with Savannah over the last 5 years to help our clients get various funds for innovation-centric activities. My background specifically is more so towards medical devices. Prior to coming to Leyton, I was working with soft tissue repair mesh and cardiothoracic drainage equipment. So needless to say, my expertise is in the life sciences, but as Savannah said, our team and ourselves even have expanded to work with clients through a multitude of different industries. To give you a brief overview of Leyton and who we are an international consulting firm. We have over 50,000 clients around the world, 3,000 employees, and 25 years of experience. Our headquarters here in the US are in Boston and San Francisco. So you will definitely have access, if you work with us, to our resources here, but also all of our sister entities across the globe that we pull from for resources and support when needed. So today, of course, we're going to be going through sources of grant funding. So who are the grant makers in this space? What initiatives and activities are typically funded by grants? Then we'll get into the specifics of innovation that is being funded by stage, by project and activities, applicable funding mechanisms related to the stage and the project, and then finally get into the overall process. What is the application process? What are key pieces of information you need to keep in mind? So as I said, sources of grant funding, who are the main grant makers here? We will be discussing federal, state, and local, and also private grant makers. So the first one here is our federal system. So this is the largest grant-making system. It has over 800 grant-making agencies. That includes major agencies as well as sub-agencies with more than 40,000 programs every year. So opening and closing at different times. Needless to say, the federal grant space is vast, and it is one of the most vast in the whole world. So awards in this space range from several thousands to millions of dollars and even unrestricted budgets in certain cases. So examples of agencies which you're probably also familiar with are the National Institute of Health, the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Defense. The NIH alone has more than 4,000 programs and billions of dollars of funding to offer. The DoD, on the other end, is not as vast in terms of volume, but they are significant in terms of their strategic impact. They have very specified initiatives that they're seeking to fund, and in order to do so, they do have larger and even in some cases unrestricted budgets. Some programs that you may also be familiar with are the SBIR and STTR programs, ARPA-E, Build to Scale. These are all federal programs. SBIR, STTR, specifically America's Seed Fund, has done wonders to help support our startups from, proof of concept through commercialization in the US. And right now there are two bills, one proposing to make this permanent and another one to extend it through 2028. A lot of these programs are active and expanding as we speak. So if you are interested in applying to federal grants, where should you look? Luckily, this is the most centralized of all of our grant makers we're going to speak about. So you can look at grants.gov, sam.gov, and even agency-specific portals like EERE Exchange for the DOE in order to find these grants. Although because of the vastness of it, it will sometimes take some time to dig through all the different opportunities to find one that you are aligned with. Next is state and local agencies. So state governments, local municipalities, regional agencies, they are also grant makers, but typically these grants are region specific. So this will depend on the location of your business, the location of activities. These awards are typically lower, and the applicant pool is a bit smaller because it is location-based and regional priorities, but that also can make these opportunities slightly less competitive than federal grants, which have really broad and large scope. So where to look for these, you can go to state economic development websites, local chambers of commerce websites, regional innovation council boards. There will also sometimes be local innovation hubs present in different cities or regions. Some examples would be Mass Ventures or New York Star. A lot of times these kinds of agencies or innovation hubs will offer matching funds for federal grants like an SBIR match, or provide workforce training, infrastructure and R&D support, etc. And then the last one we're going to discuss in this section is private grant makers. So these grant makers are philanthropic foundations, corporations, or individuals. So typically these opportunities and what they're looking to fund will align with the mission of the funder. An example is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So this initiative typically is to support global health, global development, and global opportunity at scale. These opportunities are usually more prevalently offered to nonprofits and academic institutions, although there are still some awards available to for-profits. If you find one that you're aligned with and that you're interested in, we do suggest partnering with one or more of the eligible parties. So get in touch with a nonprofit that aligns with this opportunity. Get in touch with an academic institution you know is focused on the kind of research that the opportunity is seeking to fund, and then potentially become a co-applicant or a sub-awardee there so that you can still benefit from this funding opportunity, just in a less direct way. Also, some private opportunities are accelerators and competitions. Normally, these are tailored more towards early stage startups. They can offer non-dilutive funding or mentorship, but some examples of this would be X Prize, Hello Tomorrow, MIT Solve competition. These opportunities are far less centralized, so you will have to track them down. Normally, the opportunities are listed on each foundation's website, corporation websites, or innovation challenge platforms.
Okay, so one of the most common questions that we get is, what is the success rate for grants? Allie, do you have any insights on this?
This is certainly one of the most common questions we get, and it is one that everybody would love to know the answer to, right? It's not always that straightforward, but across all different sectors and agencies, it is estimated the success rate is less than 10%, especially when you get into these more competitive federal grants. It can be well under 10%. However, there are some things you can keep in mind to help boost that. So some things that influence the success success rate is the type of funder, the grant size and scope that you're looking to apply to, the experience of the grant writer or the team that's applying, and of course, the quality of your proposal and alignment with the funder priorities. So some things we can really stress are that we see upon resubmission or reapplication success rates increasing for grants where there's strong alignment. There also, though, will be a lot of people that get kicked out or not reviewed up front just based on errors in the drafting or not strong alignment at all. So you really want to make sure that you're reviewing opportunities thoroughly, that you're drafting opportunities thoroughly in a persuasive fashion. One way to ensure this is to make sure that you're working with an experienced grant writing team. When you take these things into account, you can more than double or triple your chances for receiving those grants. So now that we have discussed who the grant makers are, what grants are out there, what are the general activities that are funded by grants? So we do see 4 main pillars of funding: research and innovation, sustainability, social impact, and workforce development and business expansion. Of course, research and innovation or social impact, there can be some overlap in between 1, 2, or all of these, but generally you can classify opportunities and the funding they're looking to provide into these 4 buckets. So research and innovation, this is the largest bucket of funding that there is through grants, and it is going to be the focus of the second half of this presentation. This kind of funding encompasses the entire innovation lifecycle, which Savannah will get into more in the next section, but anywhere from basic research to commercialization. These kinds of grants can support individual researchers, universities, industry partnerships, or just corporations and for-profit organizations. And typically, of course, the main initiatives are aligned with national initiatives. So right now, some buzzwords are AI, biotech, advanced manufacturing. Every year, hundreds of billions of dollars are attributed to these kinds of grants, around 3% of the total federal budget. Common funders in this space are the NSF, NIH, DoD, DOE, NASA, SBA, and you will likely have heard of NIH research grants or the DoD Advanced Research Initiatives, USDA Agriculture and Food Research Initiatives, those kinds of large programs in this space. Sustainability. This kind of funding focuses on, of course, climate change mitigation, clean energy development, resilient infrastructure, and a circular economy. Some buzzwords in this space are green tech, carbon capture, water conservation, sustainable ag, and these kinds of opportunities support both mitigation and adaptation strategies. And you will also see that in this space, there is a lot of cross-agency initiatives. So the DOE working with the USDA or the DOE working with the EPA to put together these opportunities. Tens of billions of dollars in federal funding go towards this initiative. It's also a very large priority most of the time. Next is social impact. So this, of course, goes across all different industries. It's funding that focuses on supporting health equity, housing, community development, education, really just equity across all fronts. Affordable housing innovation, broadband and digital equity, healthcare access programs. It has a strong emphasis on underserved populations and inclusive innovation, often funded through NIH, DHHS, HUD, DOJ, and individual private foundations. Tens to hundreds of billions of dollars can be allocated to these kinds of initiatives, as I said, because it spans across really all agencies and all industries. The DHHS has the Community Service Block grants. DOE has Equity and Energy Justice grants. We have Mental Health and Substance Abuse grants. CDC Public Health and Infrastructure grants. Really, this space can be very vast. And then lastly, workforce development and business expansion. I would say this is one of the smaller areas here and more so covered by smaller incentives, credits, but there are some grants here. Funding supports upskilling of employees in new technologies or processes, hiring new technical staff, supporting regional economic growth. So this could be apprenticeship and internship programs, rural business development. The value add producer grant is a good example here of encouraging businesses to expand into different markets. Applicants of these opportunities should really try to align with regional workforce needs and inclusive hiring goals. Less than 10 billion in funding here, still a significant amount, but the smallest of the categories that we've been discussing, at least at the federal level.
Okay, so you've covered many of the amazing things that can be covered by grants. Allie, what are some things that may not be able to be covered by grants?
That is also a great question. One common misconception, or I suppose question from our clients is, can activities that I've already performed be covered or reimbursed by this grant opportunity? The answer is no. So a lot of times grants are there to specifically fund activities that you wouldn't be able to do without the grant money itself. So a lot of these are prospective. When you're putting together a budget, it's going to be of costs that you have not yet incurred, that you anticipate to incur. So that's one thing to keep in mind. As well as grants are really looking to support activities that create public value, that drive innovation at scale, that address specific societal needs. So if your efforts are really truly siloed to just improving or innovating within your own business, those kinds of activities also likely won't be covered by grants. But something to keep in mind is that there are other tax credits incentives that are really beneficial for that kind of innovation. The R&D tax credit being one of those, which we also work with a lot for our clients to help them claim. So there are ways to kind of fund both sides of the spectrum, but grants would not be one when it comes to just kind of siloed efforts with not that much external impact.
Awesome. Thank you, Allie, for going through all of those. So as Allie said, she talked a little bit about the more general grant process, the more general grant funders, and then the different pillars of grants that are out there. As she mentioned, research and innovation grants do tend to be the largest portion of grant funding available, at least at a federal level. So the way that they typically organize these research grants, or a good way for you to kind of start screening or thinking about what type of grant you should apply to cover the research endeavor that you're looking for, is to evaluate kind of what stage of research or development you are in with whatever endeavor it is that you are undertaking. So typically grants, a good example is the NIH will kind of organize their research and the amount of funding available for that research by the stage of development, as I said. So when you're in those early stages, there are typically opportunities or grants that will fund exploratory research where you're really discovering new scientific concepts or new technical concepts. It also is going to fund hypothesis-driven applied research. And then, of course, translation of those scientific or technical concepts to some form of application. So this is really your early stage really all of these are going to be for people that are in the lab, discovering new scientific concepts, etc. And so when you're applying to these early stage grants or grants to cover early stage research, you really need to stress the scientific merit, the novelty, and the potential impact on the scientific environment itself, as Allie mentioned. The next stage of activity that grants are typically going to fund are product development activities. So you have your scientific concept, you have the application to which you're going to apply that concept or that technology. Now it's time to develop a prototype or a lead candidate that you're going to move forward and hopefully get to the market. So there are opportunities that align with selection of a lead candidate, feasibility and proof of concept testing, and then, of course, prototype or formula design and development. So in these applications, you typically want to stress the innovation, the potential impact, and the quality of the research environment. And what they mean by the quality of the research environment for these opportunities is how prepared are you as the applicant to move forward with this research. So, if you can demonstrate that you have scientists with a lot of experience or engineers with a lot of experience, a lot of publishing, if you can demonstrate that the company is well established, that they have perhaps taken other products to the market, and they've successfully done that, then that's going to be a really good scientific environment. And you want to emphasize that in these kinds of applications. One thing to note is it's around this stage that companies or entities start thinking about intellectual property protection, patents, things like that. There is sometimes funds available for patent protection or IP related expenses. It's really important that you check the solicitation or the funding opportunity or even the agency to see if those activities may be covered within the budget. Of course, the next stage, at least for drugs and medical devices, are going to be clinical trials, whether that be preclinical or human clinical testing. So if you're doing your animal studies to go forward with your IND application, if you already have your IND application and you're looking to get funding for human clinical trials obviously tend to be in the tens of millions of dollars in cost. So these grants are going to be a little because the agencies do recognize that. A lot of these opportunities do assist with regulatory consulting and FDA submission prep. So as you're preparing that FDA application or that IND application, these funds may be able to help cover some of those expenses, because I know the IND application can be upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Within these opportunities, we really should be emphasizing the safety, the efficacy, and the regulatory readiness for this product or this medical device to go to market. They want to know that there's minimal risk in these human clinical trials, and they want to know that the drug or the medical device you're moving forward with is efficacious. So you really want to have that data, those animal studies backing up when you come into this grant application for clinical trials. And then finally, after you've completed your testing, you've gotten all of your validations, you have your prototype, your final formula, we get to the scale up and commercialization phase. So there does tend to be less funding available for these activities. That's not to say there aren't still some opportunities out there, but funds typically will cover things like scale up and pilot production to prepare for market launch, your tech transfer from pilot to commercial production, market validation, really any of those activities that are going to demonstrate or that are necessary to produce or sell this product or process at scale. So the SBIR phase 2, the EDA build to scale, those are both good examples of opportunities that fund commercialization activities. Phase 2 specifically of the SBIR has a big focus on commercialization. So as you can imagine, in these applications, you really want to demonstrate that the product or the process, whatever it is you're working on, has clear market potential, there's a significant ROI, and there's a large impact on whether it be the scientific environment or just the country as a whole. You really want to emphasize that in a persuasive manner when you're applying to the opportunities for scale up and commercialization.
Thank you, Savannah, for that explanation on the various steps of research that grants can support. Now, with all these different phases of research, how does funding differ based on the development stage?
That's a great question. So I think we can think about this in two different ways. So the portion of total grant funding that is available on the federal scale typically is going to be larger for early stage activities. So that translational exploratory research, that does get the majority of funding from at least the federal government. However, with that being said, although there might be more opportunities available for early stage research, the value of those opportunities is going to be a lot less than they would be for clinical trials or commercialization. So there might be more opportunities available, but they are lower value. And the reason for that really is because of the actual needs of the research. As I said, clinical trials can cost tens, $20 million. So the funding available reflects that. Those grant opportunities reflect that in value. Same with commercialization. Early stage activities, you have less people. You have very different needs of the researchers. There's not as much material necessary. So those grants are going to be lower in value. However, they do try to be realistic with each stage of development, and that does reflect the stage and kind of the financial needs for that to achieve that goal. Awesome. So now we're going to move on to a little more specifics about the actual grant application process and kind of the administrative function of those grants. First, we're just going to touch upon generally funding mechanisms. This is something you're going to see as you're doing digging for available opportunities. And what the funding mechanism is really how the funding is realized. So it defines how the funding is going to be structured, whether that be quarterly, monthly, there's a bank account, etc. And it also describes what activity it supports in terms of collaboration, in terms of agency involvement. So it does vary by agency. The NIH uses activity codes. They're very well organized. Other agencies like the DoD are commonly use cooperative agreements or contracts. So as you're going through kind of trying to select an opportunity that fits your activity, it's really important that you understand the mechanism and the function of the money itself, right? That's at the end of the day what matters. So these are some just common funding structures across agencies or some terminology that you'll see. We use the word grants very loosely, but when you're actually applying to grants, a grant itself is very flexible funding. It's kind of a liquid injection of almost very minimally restrictive funds, and there's also very little agency involvement. So if you get a grant from the NIH, they're not going to be involved that much. Cooperative agreements, these are more collaborative with the agency. You see these with the NIH and the DoD. The agency might have a little more input into the direction of the research. So it's really about cooperation between the applicant and the agency, but you still receive those funds to perform the research. The DoD loves their procurement contracts, so that's something else that's worth pointing out. As you can imagine, procurement contracts are focused on towards the end of development. Once the DoD has funded all of the development, all the commercialization, scale up, etc., then they would like an agreement that they have the first right to procure whatever drug, product, process, etc., that you guys have developed using those funds. There are also some miscellaneous mechanisms, prizes and challenges, other transaction authorities that are pretty minor and really not that common in that grant space. So just as an example, I won't run through all these, but the NIH uses activity codes to organize their funding mechanisms. So you have the R series, which is going to be research, the U and P series, which is going to be cooperative agreements or center grants or project grants. And even within those series, you have that segregated by stage. So exploratory, applied research, etc. So as you're choosing which opportunity to apply to, it's important to both look at the development stage that your research will be at the time of award, and then also the activity to ensure it matches with the needs of the research or the needs of the business. So if you're looking for commercialization, you would want to look at build to scale. If you're looking at early stage research, then you're looking at those R21, R03 grants from the NIH.
Awesome. So now that we have really dove into the mechanisms, activities, etc., let's get into some general guidance with regards to the application process. So all grants are going to have some pre-application activities, and all federal grants are going to have registration requirements. These are required to verify your organization's eligibility, so the type of entity you are, your size, location. It's going to ensure secure access to the relevant grant system so you can submit your application, manage your awards, receive funds, etc. You'll see the first one on here is the sam.gov registration. This normally takes 7 to 10 days, but if it's delayed, can take weeks or even months to complete. So we definitely suggest getting ahead of this one and getting it started as soon as you identify an opportunity you'd like to apply to. This is an entity level registration. Something else to keep in mind is when you are kind of assigning who's going to be your POC, who's going to be your AOR, your primary POC, known as the eBiz POC, is going to be designated when you do your sam.gov registration. Once you complete your sam.gov registration, you are going to be provided with a UEI number, a unique entity identifier, for all government agency applications. So regardless of if you've decided what opportunity you're applying to, which agency, etc., you can go ahead and get your UEI just to be prepared for that application at any point. You will also need a login.gov. This is a two-factor authentication system that is used for sam.gov and grants.gov. And then you will need your own login to grants.gov. So in grants.gov, you will have access to all government grants. You will utilize login.gov to get into the platform, but you will have your own separate username and password for grants.gov. Your eBiz point of contact should be the same as your authorized organization rep in grants.gov. Lastly, you'll be able to utilize Workspace to actually submit your application in grants.gov. So it's very confusing. These different registrations and logins all intertwine, and there really are best practices to keep in mind here. Outside of Workspace, individual agencies might have their own platforms like eBRAP, which is used by the DoD, or ERA Commons, which is used by the NIH. Alrighty, now that those very confusing registrations have been discussed, let's walk through your typical grant application process. This can span anywhere from 9 to 12 months or even longer from start to finish. It begins when an agency releases a solicitation, a request for proposal, also known as an RFP. You might also see acronyms like a NOFO or an RFA. But this document outlines everything you need to know in terms of eligibility criteria, project duration, project scope, deadlines, submission instructions. So truthfully, these documents can be extremely long, but it is very, very important that you do read through them fully and you read through them with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that you are actually eligible, that your projects are within the scope, that it's not already expired, or to see if it has actually been updated and amended to allow for additional application deadlines, etc. Some grants, as I said, require pre-application steps outside of registration. So this might include a white paper, letter of intent, project summary. These are used to screen applicants before inviting them to submit a full proposal. So if your pre-application is accepted, you'll receive an invitation to then submit your full application. And this is where the real work begins. So those steps with the white paper, letter of intent, project summary, really super easy breezy. A lot of times those are 1 page or less that you can more quickly write up. When you get the full application, this is the real hard, intense work. You're going to be developing a very detailed proposal. You're going to need to draft all the required forms and attachments, which Savannah will get into in this next section, and you're going to need to follow very strict formatting and length requirements. Submissions will be made through the designated portal, which we just referenced some of them in that last slide: Workspace, ERA Commons, grants.gov. You'll enter some information directly into this portal, so some information will need to be hard-coded, whereas there will be sections for you to upload and attach any forms or attachments that you needed to draft to complete your proposal. So all in all, putting together a grant application is a very detailed and meticulous process. Once submitted, your application will then need to go through a peer or a technical review. Each round of this review can last for up to 3 months, and this can have multiple rounds of review. So you might be looking at 3, 6, 9 months of just review, depending on the grant itself. if you are selected for funding, you'll then receive a notification of award followed by an execution of contracts and agreements. So all in all, you will want to make sure your planning is impeccable here. You'll want to make sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, because this is a pretty long process and a big time investment.
So Ali just showed us how grants are a very complex process. In your expert opinion, what's the best starting point in the grant process?
Yep, so Savannah will get into the specific forms and attachments, but so it's a great transitioning question. I'll reference a few of them here in my answer. Of course, number one would be get started on that registration, get started on your SAM.gov registration, even if you don't yet know what opportunity you want to apply to, but you know you want to get into the grant space, get that going. And then once you have an opportunity actually identified and you've thoroughly reviewed the RFP and you understand the different forms and attachments, you'll want to get started with the bulkiest parts. Well, truthfully, actually, you should probably start with the specific aims or whichever form you are required to outline specifically the intention of your research, what you're trying to achieve. So start with the specific aims, get organized, and then get right into the bulkiest parts, which is typically the research strategy and the budget or budget justification. The reason that you want to do these simultaneously is because when you are writing your research strategy, you're already going through all of the activities that are going to need to happen, when they're going to need to happen, who and what's going to be required for these things to take place. And so as you're doing that, you can log all of those things in your budget for expenses associated with each one of these activities. If you don't do them simultaneously, it is a bit more of a haul to go back and review those things and to draw the timeline then. You're kind of doubling up on work that you already did. So definitely recommend registration, SAM.gov registration, specific aims document to organize yourself and set the stage, and then the bulkiest parts, the budget and the research strategy.
Great. So now that we know a little bit about the real kind of overarching process for application, it can obviously take a while, as Ali said. You're really looking at 9 to 12 months. However, actually preparing the grant application even before you submit, it can be very complicated. It's very thorough. It's very in-depth. So I'm going to try to hit upon some of the key points or the major parts of grant applications really across agencies. Some of these points are applicable only to some agencies or the other. However, there are sort of elements that are common to each application that I think it's worth expanding upon as you guys are looking into applying to opportunities. So first things first, you really want to make sure in the solicitation, the funding opportunity announcement, that you are actually eligible to apply. So there are grants that are available only sometimes for nonprofits or only for government entities. If you're a for-profit business or a small business, you're not going to be able to apply directly to that opportunity. So it's important to check the applicant type to ensure that that aligns with your SAM.gov registration and with your business or your entity in general. You always want to double check the funding details. So sometimes certain grants have restrictions on the use of funding. Some have cost share requirements where you're required to front 20, 50% of whatever you receive from the government. And then they typically do have a maximum direct cost per year or per performance period. So make sure you double check that you're aware of the restrictions, because that can cause your application to get kicked back if you do not pay attention to that. You also want to double check the maximum performance period. Sometimes that's a year, sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's 3 years. Just make sure that you're aware of that so you don't, again, get that application kicked back. Most importantly, when you're looking at grants or solicitations, you really want to double check that the work you're doing or the work you're planning on doing aligns with the scope and purpose of the grant program. So when Congress allocates a certain amount of funds to a program, they will have pretty broad areas of interest, such as decarbonization in general. So that's a broad area of research. So you want to make sure that obviously whatever work you're doing is going to apply to that broader area program. Now, after the program funds are allocated to the agencies, so there might be some allocated to the NSF, NIH, DOD, then those specific agencies get to essentially use those funds for an even more niche topic within that broader topic. And those are typically called specific areas of interest or topic areas of interest. And so within, let's say, decarbonization, maybe they are specifically looking for research as to the conversion of carbon into some other compound. And so that's something that, you know, you really want to double check. And if there's great alignment and it's exactly what you're doing, then it's probably going to be a great opportunity for you to apply to. Some common attachments, as Ali said, within each platform, you will be hard coding a lot of information into the platform itself. Typically, that information is going to be administrative in nature. So addresses, names, phone numbers, you know, certifications, etc. The bulk of the application is really done outside the platform, and they're done in the form of a chat attachment. So these are things you're writing in Word or whatever program you're using. And these are just some that are common across most applications that we see. You're always going to have biograph sketches. You're usually going to have some specific aims that typically will get released publicly if the grant is funded. You have a project abstract or narrative, something that summarizes it, some supporting documents, your statement of work, which is really going to detail the actual activities that you're doing. You have the bulkiest document, which really is your project narrative, sometimes called research strategy. You can usually tell that by it being 15 to 18 pages long. And then, of course, your budget justification is very important. You're going to have to justify why you need the funds. And then lastly, there is usually some form of data management and sharing plan where you explain what data is going to be generated in the research, how it's going to be used. Is it going to be released into a certain platform? Are you going to share it? The government does want to encourage research to be shared for the common good. So if you are able to do that and you don't have IP restrictions, it's a really good thing to consider when you're applying to opportunities. Of course, letters of support, I'll just mention that quickly. The more support you have for the research, the more likely the agency is going to take it seriously. So make those connections, get those letters of support when you're applying to these opportunities. So when you're deciding personnel, I think this can get a little confusing, so I wanted to highlight this. You typically have your senior key personnel, other direct personnel, consultants, and contractors. So your senior key personnel are always going to be the direct performers. You know, these are engineers or scientists or researchers that have a lot of industry experience, maybe a lot of publications. It's going to be your principal investigator, any scientists or engineers, and then typically a finance person. And these people are known by name in the grant application. So they're getting called out individually and they have individual bio sketches. You can also get funding for other direct personnel. So let's say you need 10 operators to, run your commercialization batch or your commercial batch. It's not necessarily relevant what each of those operators are or who they are or their work history. It's more relevant that they are an operator and they will be performing a certain task. So you can use other direct personnel funds to fund like 10 operators or maybe 3 lab assistants, etc. Finally, you have consultants and contractors. So these are both outside the company. Typically, consultants are individual experts that perhaps don't work at the company, but you still want involved. Oftentimes we see businesses use statisticians or, a university professor to be involved in the research, and that's going to bolster that application. Finally, you have your contractors. Of course, in the biotech space, this is huge. You are going to be able to request funds for your CROs, your CDMOs, and the contractors are typically something where you have a specific quote for a specific amount of work that they are capable of doing that you are not. So just keep this in mind as you are setting up your application of who you want to be leading the project, what kind of people you're going to need, and then any consultants or contractors you will be using. The other thing to keep in mind as you're developing your application, you're writing this bulky 15-page research strategy, you're emphasizing the innovation, all of these things. You are going to also, as Ali said, want to be developing your budget. So when you're developing your budget, although the actual budget typically gets hard coded in the platform, whether it be grants.gov, Error Commons, etc., you are going to need a justification attachment to upload alongside that budget. So direct costs can be salaries, fringe benefits, materials, contractors, consultant, etc. You can also request indirect funds, so lease expenses, IP costs, any overhead. Your indirect expenses cannot be greater than 15% of the total budget requested. We typically don't see that as a problem, but I know there are some issues with that sometimes in university settings. So keep in mind, if you're requesting someone's salary who's a senior or key personnel, you want to have a good methodology to explain how you came to that number. If you're requesting $100,000 for a year worth of research, you're going to need to say that this person is anticipated to work 12 months or 11 months, 20 hours a week on the research. And that's how you came to that calculation. And you might need this contractor or this CDMO to actually achieve your commercialization process or your commercial process. So as long as you have a reasonable justification, there's typically not much that gets kicked back in terms of budget, as long as it's within the restraints of the actual solicitation or the grant.
With all these moving parts, is there a section of the application that tends to weigh the most heavily on the funding decision?
Certainly. I know I keep mentioning this project narrative or research strategy document. That's really where you're doing your persuasive writing, right? You need to almost sell yourself as a business. So you need to include any prior research in that. You need to make an argument as to why this research is so important. You need to make an argument as to the impact it's going to have in whatever the target population is, and then the population as a broader whole. You really want to lay out, every single step with uncertainties, risks, everything associated with that. And then, describe the research environment, describe the company's capabilities, etc. So that is probably going to be your biggest determinant in submitting or in getting funded, is how well you're writing that research strategy. The supplementary documents, of course, are important. They want to see a well-written, well-developed specific aims, but the primary scoring or primary rating is going to be from that main project narrative or research strategy.
Great. So with all of this information, we do just want to reiterate a few key things to remember. Start organizing. Sorry, I'll wait for the slide. Start organizing your registrations across all platforms as early as possible. Make sure that you're designating one person with power as your eBiz POC and your AOR. Make sure you are keeping track of all your passwords. Please have them somewhere in an organized fashion. You will need them all. Ensure consistent information across all platforms. Assign roles across the organization. So as Savannah was saying, senior and key personnel, other personnel, consultants, etc. The funding agency really wants to see that you have an all-star team that is lined up and ready to execute the strategy or the scope of work that you're proposing. So make sure that you do a really good job of identifying those key individuals, identifying consultants and contractors that are going to paint that picture and show that you are ready to tackle this on all fronts. Again, read the entire FOA or solicitation. Make sure you pay attention to eligibility, topics of interest, any additional requirements, deadlines, etc. Make sure that your application is not going to get kicked out early for missing any of these points or details that you could have easily found in the solicitation itself. Make use of the program or the scientific officer. So you will see on the solicitation, there is a program officer, there is a scientific officer from that agency that you can actually reach out to. This is a free resource. Make sure that you build that rapport with them, ask them questions. Before even deciding to apply, you can ask them questions about what they think about your project or your alignment. So get started on that early. They love to see you building that rapport with them, and it truly is an invaluable resource for you. check, double check, triple check page numbers and attachments. Make sure that formatting is in line. Make sure the length requirements are being met. Make sure things are titled as outlined in the solicitation itself. Begin completing all the hard-coded administrative information in the submission platform as soon as possible. As Savannah said, that normally is administrative, more so in nature, but really it's just one less thing on your plate if you go ahead and get that knocked out. Try to submit at least 24 hours early. We would highly suggest more than 24 hours, but please do not wait until the last minute. There typically are one or two kinks to work out, one or two loose ends to tie up. Even the best laid plans, sometimes have one or two kinks that you still need to work out. So please ensure some time in advance when you're trying to submit. And of course, clear your calendars on submission day, because sometimes it is a little bit of a process to get all those error messages out of the way and to get everything successfully submitted. So thank you all so much for listening. Oh, we have one more question. Apologies.
Yes, just one quick question. This one's actually personally my favorite. So what role does Leyton play in the grant application process?
So Leyton can play all the roles. We wear all the hats. We offer support from the identification of opportunities. So if you're unfamiliar with the grant space at all and you don't really know where to look, you're not sure if there are opportunities out there that are relevant to you or your business, Leyton can do that scoping and searching for you and come back to you with those applicable opportunities. When it comes to actually drafting and submitting and supporting a grant application, Leyton can also provide tailored end-to-end support here. So if you need help with the actual drafting, you don't have a grants team on staff, we can do the legwork there in collaboration with you. Or if you already have a team, we can help just review those documents and advise and act more so as project managers, making sure you're drafting all the appropriate attachments, making sure that you are, meeting those drafting criteria, that it's a persuasive argument, that you're not missing any important information. We can help you set up registrations, liaise with program officers and main agency points of contact, and also help you with the submission. So whether you have a team, you're just looking to scale, looking for some guidance, we're there for you. If you don't have a team and you need a team to help you get started, we're there for you, really in any way that our clients need.
And I think we did have one question here in the chat. So do I need to tailor each application to each specific grant? This is actually a very common question that we get. So in short, it depends on the agency. So for example, if you have one application you've developed for one specific grant opportunity, you typically cannot take that exact application asking for the same exact research activities, the same exact budget, etc., and submit that to another opportunity within the same agency. So you really can typically only use that application for that grant specifically. Now you can apply to multiple grants for various activities. So often what we have is clients applying to 3 to 4 grants a year, trying to get funding for, 1 to 2 to 3 stages of their research. So it looks a little bit like continuous application from start to finish, broken up into individual parts. So to answer your question, you really do need to tailor each application to the specific grant opportunity that's available. And that really is because each grant opportunity is unique. It is individual. It does have specific areas of interest, etc. Thank you so much, Bob, for the question.
I think we did have one more question. So this one is just kind of about how competitive grants are right now. We know in the past couple months there have been some administrative changes. So I guess how competitive are grants given the current landscape?
So as we touched on before, grants, especially at the federal level, are highly competitive. Of course, everybody wants quote unquote free money. So a lot of people will throw their hat in the ring. I do think that a lot of those people will get kicked out early on if it's just not a solid application, if there's administrative errors, etc. But nonetheless, it is a highly competitive landscape. There are a lot of companies out there that are applying, so it is important to make sure that you do have a persuasive application, to make sure that you are not showing any of those rookie mistakes or getting your application denied just due to administrative errors. So we would say very highly competitive, but you have to cast your net, far and wide and just keep on applying. It's really the only way to gain success and traction in the grant space, and either work with a team like ours or, gain experience that way. But keep on trying.
Thank you all so much for joining and listening in. This has been such a pleasure to present to you guys. We hope you found it useful. We do encourage you, if you have any questions, to please reach out, book a meeting with one of us. We're always happy to have a discussion and see how we might be able to help you guys, or just answer any grants questions that you have in general. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.